It seems there is a mistake, sir. We need you to move to serve our VIP passengers. A sentence that stunned the CEO. Just a few minutes later, he stunned the airline. The soft hum of the cabin lights glowed like candlelight above the first-class seats, bathing the space in a warmth that whispered luxury. Leather chairs curved around each passenger like a protective cocoon. Champagne glasses glistened. Jazz music floated low in the background. Everything was still, polished, controlled. Edric Morrison stepped onto Flight 791 with the poise of a man who didn't need to prove anything. He wore a tailored blue checkered suit that hugged his tall frame effortlessly, his shirt crisp, his cufflinks subtle yet refined. No bodyguard, no entourage, just a small leather carry-on and a calm presence that seemed to ripple through the air as he walked. His eyes moved quietly across the cabin, not scanning, just noticing, measuring. Seat 2A. He reached it and exhaled gently as he lowered himself into the plush leather. A flight attendant nearby offered a nod but didn't smile. Edric nodded back, unbothered. He placed his phone against his ear. "Yes, everything's confirmed," he said, his voice smooth, low, deliberate. "The acquisition papers are with the board. I'll sign once I land." A pause. "No, they don't know yet. I'm keeping it that way." A soft chuckle left his lips as he glanced out the window. On the surface, Edric blended in. No loud gestures, no designer logos shouting for attention. But there was something in the way he sat straight-backed, relaxed, legs gently crossed, that told another story. Power in restraint, confidence in stillness. A woman in a white fur coat entered the cabin minutes later. Blonde hair, red lips, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Her heels clicked sharply against the aisle carpet. She stopped abruptly, looking at Edric, then down at her ticket, then back again. A subtle frown formed. Edric felt her pause but didn't look up. He remained focused on his call. From the corner of the cabin, a stewardess Ava watched the woman, then Edric. Her posture shifted, one step forward, then another, and just like that, the atmosphere bent ever so slightly, like a faint pressure change before a coming storm. Edric finished his call and set his phone down. He could feel it, that shift, that tightening of breath. Ava approached with a clipboard pressed to her chest. Her smile was polite, too polite, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she began. "I believe this may be a seating error." Edric turned to her slowly, calmly, not defensive, just present. "I'm in 2A, confirmed on my boarding pass. Is there an issue?" A flicker of something passed through Ava's eyes. Discomfort, maybe, or disbelief. Before she could respond, the woman in white, the one with the coat and the frown, let out a short, amused breath. Almost a laugh. That's when Edric knew. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about perception. And in that moment, he didn't feel angry. Not yet. He just felt ready. Ava Simons adjusted the lapel of her gray uniform as she made her way back down the aisle. Clipboard in hand, a practiced smile stitched onto her lips. She didn't rush. She never did. Everything in first class demanded grace, not speed poise, not urgency, but something in her chest stirred uneasily. It wasn't just about a seating discrepancy. Not really. Not this time. Passengers were settling in, arranging their tablets, sipping wine, flipping through safety cards. But Ava's attention was locked onto the man in seat 2A, tall, dark-skinned, impeccably dressed. Unfamiliar, unfamiliar. That was the part that itched. She'd worked this route dozens of times. She knew their regulars, investment bankers, retired CEOs, congressmen with that glazed, self-important look. She knew Celeste Donovan, too. Seat 2A was practically branded with her name. But now that stranger, sat there with quiet confidence, talking on the phone like he owned the sky. And worse, he didn't flinch. He didn't look grateful to be there, just grounded, as though the seat belonged to him, as though he did not need permission. She approached carefully. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone even. "I believe there may be a small issue with your seat assignment." The man, Edric Morrison, turned to her without urgency. His eyes met hers, calm but alert. "I'm in 2A, he said, without raising his voice. "It's on my ticket and on your chart." He held out his boarding pass, smooth and precise. Ava leaned forward slightly and examined it. Seat 2A, clear as day, confirmed. VIP status, priority boarding. Still, her chest tightened. She offered a delicate smile laced with doubt. "It's just that Mrs. Donovan, one of our frequent first-class travelers, usually requests this seat. She's just boarding now, and we want to make sure no preferences were accidentally overlooked." She stepped aside as Celeste Donovan arrived, white fur coat brushing against shoulders, perfume trailing in her wake. Her lips curled into a smirk the moment she saw Edric. "Well," Celeste said with a laugh that cut through the air, "someone got comfortable." Edric didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, measuring the moment. Ava glanced between them. She felt it, the tension, the weight of the stares from nearby passengers now quietly eavesdropping. "I'm sorry," she said again, just a touch firmer. "But would you mind relocating to 3C for this flight? It's also first class, of course." Edric blinked slowly. "You're asking me to move from a seat I paid for," he said, "because someone else who didn't reserve it usually sits here?" Ava stiffened. "We're just trying to maintain a consistent experience for our regulars." "And my experience?" Edric asked, tone still low. "That's not part of the consistency?" She hesitated. Celeste snorted. "Oh, please. You're making this into something it isn't." Edric turned his eyes to her, calm, focused, like someone standing in still water, watching a storm approach. "Am I?" he asked. Before Ava could reply, another voice entered the fray, Nathan Crowley, the flight's purser, stepping in with that familiar air of corporate coolness. "Sir," Nathan said, clasping his hands together, "I understand your frustration, but we'd like to resolve this quietly. We have discretion over final seating assignments." "And do you apply that discretion equally?" Edric asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or only when someone looks like me?" Nathan's smile faltered. The air grew heavier. A passenger in 1C looked up from her book. Someone 2 rows behind adjusted their phone's camera discreetly. Ava felt her spine tingle. Nathan cleared his throat. "We can do this the easy way, Mr. Morrison, or we can involve airport security." It was a threat dressed as professionalism, and everyone heard it. For a second, time stilled. Edric looked at them both. Then he stood slowly, not defeated, not diminished, just, deliberate. He reached for his bag and adjusted the sleeve of his suit. "You've made your choice," he said quietly. "Now I'll make mine." Ava watched him walk down the aisle, every step radiating a dignity that made her feel suddenly small. Celeste dropped into the seat with a satisfied sigh. Some people just can't help but create drama. Edric paused before exiting the cabin. He turned slightly, just enough for Ava to see his face. "I wasn't creating drama," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I was absorbing it." And with that, he left. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. The hum of the jet engines returned, but the warmth in the cabin had shifted. There was a chill now, not in temperature, but in conscience. Nathan looked at Ava, jaw clenched. Let's move on. But she didn't. She stood still, heart pounding, clipboard trembling in her hands, because somewhere deep down, she knew. They hadn't just moved a passenger. They'd moved the wrong one. The airport lounge was too quiet for 10:30 in the morning. Edric Morrison sat near a corner window, his phone resting on the small black table before him, untouched. Outside, planes glided in and out like mechanical birds, detached from the weight of human conflict. But inside him, there was weather, a low-pressure system building. No thunder, no wind, just an invisible shift in the air. Something was coming. He stirred his coffee once, twice, then left the spoon on the saucer. Across from him, his assistant Raina Fields sat with a laptop balanced on her knees. Her face was pale with quiet rage. "I have the footage," she said, voice clipped. "Two angles. One from a passenger in 1C. One from the lounge security feed. Both show the interaction and the faces." Edric didn't respond. Raina kept going. "I also cross-referenced the crew manifest. Ava Simon, senior flight attendant, 6 years. Nathan Crowley Purser, 15 years. Both have been involved in prior complaints related to selective service on record. Nothing formal, just dropped." She paused, then added quietly, "This is not the first time they've done this, but it might be the last." Edric leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He wasn't angry. Anger was reactive. He was calculating. At that moment, thousands of feet above, the flight continued without him. Celeste Donovan scrolled through her phone, sipping champagne. She looked over at Ava and whispered, "You handled that so well. These things can get messy." Ava forced a smile, but something lingered behind her eyes. A tremor, a shadow of doubt. Nathan passed by, straightening his jacket. "Keep everything tight. Let's not stir it up." No one knew they had just lit the fuse of something much larger. Back in the lounge, Edric stood and buttoned his suit jacket with clinical precision. "Send the footage," he told Raina. "First to legal, then to PR, but don't post it, not yet." Raina blinked. "You're going public?" "No," he said softly. "Not yet. First, I'm going private." He picked up his phone and opened his contacts. Elliot Rains, CEO, Sky Nova Airlines. He didn't call. He texted, "You have 5 minutes. Call me. If not, the world will call you." 2 minutes later, the phone rang. "Edric, my friend." Elliot's voice came too fast, too cheerful, already nervous. "I heard there was a situation?" "There was a moment," Edric replied. "Now there's a movement." A pause on the line, a hesitation filled with dread. "I'm sure we can fix this," Elliot began. "You don't fix a crack with fresh paint, Elliot. You break the wall and rebuild it." "Can we talk this through?" Elliot asked. "Face to face?" "We'll talk," Edric said. "But I'll do the speaking." An hour later, Edric walked into the Sky Nova executive floor, not as a customer, not even as a shareholder, but as a reckoning. Executives scrambled. Meetings were cleared. Press secretaries went pale. Inside the boardroom, Elliot stood waiting, sweating beneath the air conditioning. 3 VPs hovered near the window, whispering, trying to gauge how bad it was. Edric placed a folder on the glass table and slid it across. Elliot opened it. Legal summaries, screenshots, Social media monitoring reports already tracking the video. This isn't just a PR risk, Edric said. It's a cultural diagnosis, and it's terminal. Elliot swallowed. Edric, we value you. Sky Nova has always championed diversity. Edric raised a hand. The room went still. You don't get to champion what you violate, he said. You don't get to silence people like me, then use people like me for optics. He stood tall, unwavering. So here are your options. He laid them out. 1. Immediate termination of all crew members involved. 2. Public acknowledgement of the event. 3. Mandatory anti-bias training across all Skynova staff designed and led by Edric's firm, free of charge, paid by Skynova. 4. A complete audit of customer service reports for the past 5 years made public. 5. And most importantly, no media statement until he approved the language. Elliot's face drained of color. You've already lost this deal, Edric continued. The question is, do you want to lose the company? The room was silent. Then Elliot nodded once. And just like that, a storm became a restructure. Later that day, in a press conference hastily assembled, Elliot Raines took the podium. Today, Skynova acknowledges a grave failure in our values and service. We are not just apologizing to Mr. Edric Morrison. We are committing to change. Behind the scenes, Edric watched from a quiet corner, unseen by the cameras. He didn't need the spotlight. He had already shifted the stage. Meanwhile, the internet caught fire. Clips from the flight, threads from anonymous employees, even former passengers chimed in. Justice for Edric, Onarnar, privilege, in the sky, jar, Skynova fallout. Ava Simons resigned under pressure. Nathan Crowley was dismissed for policy violations. Celeste Donovan, once celebrated in social circles, found herself disinvited from charity boards and influencer events. No one wanted to sit next to her anymore. The ripple had become a wave. And Edric? He returned home that night, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of scotch. He looked out the window at the lights of the city bright, buzzing, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just let the silence settle. Because power, when used right, doesn't need to roar. Sometimes it only needs to walk away and let the system collapse behind it. By the time the sun began to dip behind the skyline, the video had already crossed 1.2 million views. No edits, no narration, just raw footage captured from seat 1C showing Edric Morrison, seated quietly in 2A, being asked to move. Again, and again, and again. Despite presenting his ticket, despite his composure, despite his grace. And then, the moment of quiet exile, the way he stood, the way he exited without anger, the way no one stopped him. The internet didn't need a voiceover. The injustice spoke for itself. On Twitter, the tag Drusher Justice for Edric surged within hours. By nightfall, it had become a top trending topic worldwide. The threads exploded. He was in the right seat. She just didn't like that he belonged there. This is what Black dignity looks like. Calm, direct, and unforgettable. Skynova better start preparing their apology tour, because we're not letting this go. Even celebrities began to weigh in: actors, activists, public figures. The silence of Skynova only made it louder. But inside Skynova HQ, silence had turned into chaos. The PR team was split between control and collapse. Phones rang off the hook. News crews waited outside. Employees huddled in corridors, whispering about the video, the fallout, the fate of their brand. Elliot Raines, CEO, sat in his office with hands clasped and blood pressure spiking. He had complied with Edric's demands. That wasn't the issue. The issue was he'd underestimated who Edric Morrison really was. Not just a CEO, not just a shareholder, not just the architect of the firm behind Skynova's AI reformation project. Edric was something far more dangerous in a world built on image. He was unshakable, unbothered, and unbelievably credible. The next morning, Skynova was forced to act. A formal statement was posted. "We deeply regret the experience Mr. Edric Morrison encountered aboard Flight 791. His treatment did not reflect the values we claim to uphold. Effective immediately, the crew involved has been removed pending further review. In partnership with Morrison and Fields, Skynova will undergo a comprehensive anti-bias initiative across all departments. We will listen. We will learn. We will change." Some saw it as sincere. Others called it performative. But Edric, he said nothing. He simply reposted the statement with a single word: begin. Across social media, comparisons began to emerge. Other Black passengers began sharing their experiences, stories of accidental downgrades, random seat checks, and unexplained delays in boarding. What was once anecdotal became a pattern. One story told clearly had opened a floodgate. Meanwhile, Ava Simon sat on the edge of her hotel bed, staring at the television screen. Her name was now trending, but not for service, not for professionalism. A hashtag she never imagined now followed her like a shadow. Ava, the attendant. Comments poured in. Photos of her from LinkedIn, her old quotes, her former college posts, all dissected. Her phone buzzed endlessly. She stopped checking after the sixth voicemail from Human Resources. And yet, a part of her still didn't understand what had gone wrong. "I was just doing my job," she muttered. But even she didn't believe that anymore. In a quieter suburb of Georgia, Nathan Crowley sat in his car outside his daughter's school. He hadn't gone inside. He couldn't. His daughter, 11 years old, had seen the video on TikTok. Her friends had seen it. He'd spent 15 years as a flight purser, known for being calm under pressure. But he wasn't calm now. He was cracking. Emails from the union. Messages from co-workers half sympathetic, half condemning. His world, once built on seniority and status, was now sliding towards silence. And at the heart of it all, Edric remained steady, not out of vengeance, but out of responsibility. He was never after apologies. He was after alignment between what companies said they were and what they actually did when no one was supposed to be watching. That weekend, Edric sat across from an anchor on a live broadcast of 60 Minutes. She leaned forward, curiosity and admiration hidden beneath her professional tone. "Mr. Morrison, you've been called many things in the last 48 hours. CEO, reformist, a symbol of modern resistance. What do you say to those who believe this went too far?" Edric looked straight at the camera. His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It simply carried. "If doing what's right feels like too far, then maybe where we were wasn't close enough." The room went quiet. Millions heard it, and in homes, dorm rooms, offices, airports, people nodded. In the weeks that followed, Skynova's stock dipped, but then recovered after transparency measures and reforms were enacted. Edric's company, Morrison and Fields, was contracted by 3 more airlines to begin structural reform. Ava Simons began therapy. She'd lost her job but gained something she didn't know she'd buried: awareness. Nathan Crowley issued a public apology, not scripted, not forced, just real. It didn't undo the moment, but it humanized it. Celeste Donovan vanished from public life. Her real estate clients pulled out. Her name no longer appeared on gala invites. But Edric, he never raised his voice, never threw a punch, never called for heads to roll. He simply stood up, in a suit, with a boarding pass, and a refusal to be misplaced. The world had seen the storm. They had seen the footage, heard the silence of complicity, witnessed the calm strength of a man unjustly displaced. And now the headlines were shifting from outrage to opportunity. But Edric Morrison didn't care for headlines. He cared for systems, because that's where it all began. Not with one crew, or one flight, or one seat, but in the subtle mechanisms of normalization. The quiet approvals, the look the other way moments, the whispered justifications behind closed doors. And if the system was going to be different, he'd have to build it himself. In a boardroom 3 stories above Manhattan, Edric stood before a wall-length digital screen. Behind him, the skyline glistened. Before him, Sky Nova's executive leadership sat in silence. He clicked to the next slide in the presentation. Bias isn't a mistake, Edric said calmly. It's a pattern, and patterns can be reprogrammed. The room remained still. No one disagreed. Not anymore. The reform proposal, titled the Clear Skies Initiative, would become the largest internal shift in Sky Nova's 47-year history. Here's what it required. 1. Mandatory anti-bias and empathy-based training across every department from cabin crew to C-suite. 2. A new oversight board made up of external advocates, civil rights experts, and marginalized voices granted full access to internal audits. 3. Passenger experience accountability reports, published quarterly, tracking demographic-based complaints and crew behavior. 4. Anonymous reporting structures where even the lowest level employee could raise red flags without fear of retaliation. 5. Rehiring policies that included second chances for those willing to face their past, learn, and commit to change. This wasn't PR. This was infrastructure. When Edric finished, no one clapped. They weren't supposed to, because this wasn't a performance. It was a blueprint, and it was already in motion. A week later, the first internal training session began. In a quiet conference room near LAX, 10 Sky Nova flight attendants sat in a circle. Most were older, some defensive, a few silent with shame. At the center sat Raina Fields, Edric's longtime partner in leadership and reform. She didn't begin with numbers. She began with a story. My father was denied a seat on a flight in 1997, not because of capacity, not because of a mistake, just because someone didn't like the way he looked in a suit that day. He never flew again. Ever. That kind of wound doesn't hit the news, but it never stops bleeding. Silence settled, eyes lowered, and slowly, the room shifted. Over the next month, Sky Nova grounded 12% of its fleet voluntarily to facilitate nationwide staff workshops. Thousands of employees coast to coast entered rooms where they were not told what to think, but instead asked why they had never thought otherwise. The initiative made headlines, but not the kind that sought drama. These were stories of reckoning, honesty, growth. Meanwhile, Edric launched the Second Wind program, a restorative pathway for former employees like Ava Simons and Nathan Crowley. It wasn't a forgiveness campaign. It was a responsibility journey. Applicants had to publicly acknowledge their actions without excuses, undergo a 6-week reflective course on unconscious bias and systemic harm, shadow diversity advocates in community programs before reapplying for work in the airline industry. Nathan enrolled first. He sat quietly through each session, never speaking until week 4. Then one day, voice shaking, he said, "I thought I was doing my job, but I wasn't protecting the flight. I was protecting my comfort. And I see now that comfort came at someone else's cost." His words were real, imperfect, but honest. Ava followed weeks later. She had been resistant at first, convinced her intentions were clean. But one moment in a training changed her. A video played. It was her, on the flight, asking Edric to move. She watched her own eyes, her own smile, her body language. The same tone she once thought was neutral now felt condescending and dismissive. Almost rehearsed. Tears welled up in the room, but Ava didn't cry. She just whispered, "I never saw myself that way until today." Edric never made a public show of their involvement. He didn't need apologies to go viral. He needed them to matter. And they did. Because Ava, now a volunteer instructor in the Second Win program, began sharing her own story. Not to erase the harm, but to expose the mechanism behind it. And slowly the culture shifted. Months passed. Sky Nova's internal reviews began showing dramatic changes. Crew complaints based on race or appearance dropped by 47%. Positive passenger feedback surged. 3 other airlines adopted Clear Skies under Edric's firm. And then a surprise. Celeste Donovan, whose name had once been spoken with privilege and certainty, sent Edric a letter. She'd left public life, lost most of her clients, but in her note, she didn't ask for anything. Only wrote, "I watched that flight again last night, not to defend myself, but to see what you saw, and I finally understand. That seat, it was never mine. Thank you for standing, even when no one else did." Edric didn't respond, but he kept the letter, not as a symbol of grace, but as proof that some walls crack only after the echo lingers long enough. On the 1-year anniversary of Flight 791, Sky Nova hosted a global conference on bias in public service, and Edric was asked to speak. He stood at the podium, crisp navy suit, no notes. Behind him was a screen, no slideshow, just a single sentence. It wasn't about a seat, it was about who gets to feel like they belong. He looked out into the crowd. Policymakers, pilots, teachers, CEOs, students, passengers, and said, the goal was never revenge. It was revelation. We cannot fix what we will not face. And now that we've seen it, we no longer have the excuse to look away. A pause. Then, so here's our job now. Keep flying, but this time with eyes open. The boarding call echoed gently through the terminal. Flight 791 to San Francisco is now boarding first-class passengers. Please proceed to Gate A18. Edric Morrison stood slowly, brushing a speck of dust from his navy blue jacket. A different suit than before. Same fit. Same quiet elegance. But everything else, different now. His walk to the gate was unhurried, measured, familiar. A full year had passed since the flight that changed not only an airline, but an industry. He'd received thousands of letters, stood on 100 stages, led initiatives that reshaped how service, respect, and race intersected in public spaces. But today wasn't about policy. Today, he was just flying home. As he approached the gate, there was a brief pause in the air. Not awkward, not tense, just a recognition. The gate attendant looked up, young, freckled, nervous, and then quickly straightened. "Mr. Morrison," she said, tone soft, "welcome back. Your seat is ready." He nodded. "Thank you." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "It's an honor." He offered a small smile. then stepped down the jet bridge. No cameras, no press, no curated welcome, just a seat, a man, a story returning to its origin. As Edric entered the cabin, everything looked the same. The polished leather seats, the overhead lighting, the neat rows of luxury stitched into quiet corners. But there was something in the air that had shifted. The crew. Their posture wasn't tense, but attentive. Not fearful, but respectful. Eyes that truly looked not past him, but at him. He reached his seat, 2A. This time no one hesitated. No questions, no clipboard, no gentle request to move. He placed his briefcase under the seat, settled in, and leaned back, his body finding that familiar curve of comfort, but without the weight he once carried. A few minutes later, the lead flight attendant stepped forward. She was older than Ava had been, dark hair streaked with silver. Her badge read R. Lawrence, and there was no pretense in her voice. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, "my name is Rebecca. I'll be your lead attendant today. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to thank you for your patience, your strength, and your example. We've all read your story. Some of us lived in its shadow." Edric turned to her, his expression warm but steady. "Thank you," he replied, "but today I'm just a passenger." Rebecca smiled. "Then let us serve you right." And with that, she stepped away. Not because she had to, but because she understood. As the plane began its slow roll onto the tarmac, Edric stared out the window. Clouds drifted, the sky opened, and in that moment of quiet ascent, memories returned, not as wounds but as markers. He remembered the silence of that first flight, the way no one looked up, the burn of polite rejection disguised as protocol. And now there were ripples. Now people looked, spoke, changed. He didn't believe in heroes. He didn't see himself as one, but he knew the power of a decision made without shouting, of standing tall, then stepping back, so others could move forward. Midway through the flight, Edric rose to stretch his legs. He moved through the aisles like a man in his own house, not from arrogance, but from earned ease. A passenger, a young man in 3D, looked up from his tablet. "Mr. Morrison?" he asked, eyes wide. Edric nodded. "I just want to say, I'm applying for my first internship at your company, Morrison and Fields. What you did, it meant something to me. My brother was denied a job once for the same reason they asked you to move." Edric paused, then offered a seat across the aisle. "Tell me about your brother." The conversation was short, real, no branding, no posturing, just connection. As they spoke, a young woman 2 rows up subtly wiped a tear from her eye. When Edric returned to his seat, he found a folded note tucked into the tray. Handwritten, it read, "Mr. Morrison, I was on that flight last year. I didn't say anything. I watched it happen. I went home and told my husband, and I cried. I've spent this year working with youth in my city to help them speak up when it matters. Thank you for planting the seed. It grew in ways you may never see." Edric held the note for a long time. He didn't recognize the handwriting, didn't know which face it had come from. And that made it more powerful. Because the real measure of change isn't who sees it, it's who lives it. As the captain announced their final descent, Edric looked out once more. The city below was blurred by thin clouds like memory and future blending together. He closed his eyes. Inhale, exhale, peace. Not because everything had been fixed, but because something had begun. The wheels touched down. The cabin lights brightened. And as Edric stepped off the plane, He did not pause at the threshold like he had the year before. He didn't look for permission. He didn't wait to be acknowledged. He simply walked forward, unapologetic, unbothered, unshaken. The world had shifted slightly behind him, and that was enough. There was never a press release, no glossy book deal, no tell-all interview, no documentary with dramatic narration. Edric Morrison never needed to explain what happened on Flight 791, because the world already knew. They saw it not just in the video, but in the silence that followed. In the echoes of his footsteps down the jet bridge, in the faces of those who sat still, too afraid, too complicit, too conditioned to question what looked like protocol. And yet he never cursed them, never condemned the cabin, never called for outrage. He called for something harder, transformation. Months after the final flight, long after the headlines faded, Edric gave a private talk at a high school on the south side of Chicago. No stage. Just a circle of folding chairs in a gymnasium that smelled of old wood and chalk. The students didn't recognize him at first. He wasn't what they expected. No entourage, no attitude, no flashy car waiting outside. Just a man in a quiet suit who sat down like he'd been there before. One student, a girl named Liana, finally asked the question everyone was thinking. How did you stay calm when they tried to embarrass you? Edric didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked. Then he said, because it wasn't about me. It was about what would come after me. A pause. See, sometimes people fight by yelling, and sometimes they fight by staying still, so still that the people around them have no choice but to see themselves. That day I chose stillness, so the world could feel its own noise. The room was silent, not out of awe, but understanding. Later, a teacher asked if Edric could summarize what he wanted young people to take from his story. He thought for a moment, then said, never confuse being quiet with being weak. Never mistake politeness for peace, and never assume the seat you're asked to leave wasn't built with you in mind from the beginning. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not move. Edric Morrison never made his story about race alone, or status, or revenge. He made it about belonging, about a world that still measures worth by expectation, and a man who shattered that scale without raising his voice. The seat was never the point. The point was who gets to feel like they belong there, and who gets to decide that. Long after Edric moved on, after the Clear Skies initiative spread across industries, after Second Wind welcomed its 100th graduate, after Sky Nova rebranded its entire training protocol in his name, his story lived on in quiet places, in the widened eyes of a flight attendant who paused before judging, in the voice of a child who spoke up for a classmate being mocked, in the hand of a manager who gave someone a second chance, in the silence before the decision to do what's right. Because that's what Edric left behind. Not noise, not rage, just the kind of quiet that changes everything.